I'm gonna change the view to me. Hey, hi everybody. Thanks for hopping on for my magical new thing that I'm doing, which is hump day half hour. I was gonna do happy hour and then I'm like, screw that, let's just do a half hour. This is specifically for you, my little Solution Center members. And so we're gonna be talking about genders. So this is not going to be perfect. I am a work in progress, just like everybody else is. And my goal here is to just give you a general idea of how to talk about genders. And we're going to define some terms. I'm going to share a really cool little tool with you to help with this. And then, as always, if we don't dive deep enough, you can contact me and we can have a conversation or an email. Or I'm the queen of voice memos now. So you can ask me a question. I'll just voice memo you back. All right, so here we go. Genders, ta-da. So before we talk about genders, I would just like to acknowledge that I use she, her pronouns, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's two different things when it comes to talking about gender. The first is our sex assigned at birth. And so what this means is when you're born, the people who birthed you take a look at your parts and decide based on what you have, whether you have a penis or a vulva, they decide your gender. So if you got a vulva, you're a girl. You got a penis, you're a boy. And that is the gender that is assigned to us. So they tell us that that's our gender. Now, most people feel like the gender they were given at birth. So for example, I totally feel like a girl, a woman. I'm not going to show you my parts, but you can just trust me when I tell you there's a vulva and other things down there. So that is, and I'll give you the term for that. So most people feel like the gender they were assigned at birth, but not everybody does. And the cool thing for folks right now is that there's a much more expansive view of gender. And sometimes this is hard for people to understand because they're cisgender, which is what I am. They feel like they're in the right body for their gender. They feel like a girl or a guy, like it just is who they are. But because that's not the case for everyone, we need to learn how to talk about this, especially since kids these days, they know way more than we do about this. So gender encompasses two things, identity and expression. And so I'm going to give you this little tool that I love called the Gender Unicorn to kind of explain this in a little more detail. So here's the Gender Unicorn. It is a lovely little tool. So it talks about gender, identity, expression, and sex assigned at birth, and then physical and emotional attraction. So we're just going to stay up at the top and talk about gender, identity, and expression. So you'll notice that rather than being binary, like either you're a boy or you're a girl, or you're a male or you're female, it's on this cool scale. And so one of the things I recommend that you do is do this on your own or do this with your kids because it's fun and interesting. So identity is how you feel on the inside. Like, do you feel in your heart of hearts, in your heart and your mind, like whether you're a woman or a man or whatever your gender was assigned at birth. So for me, I feel like a woman. And so I am very strongly identified as a female. So if I scaled myself, so you got 0 all the way up to high, I would put myself at like 98% that identify as a woman. See the next scale, you get an opportunity to scale yourself on how you feel like a man. How much do you feel like a man or a boy? So I just said, like, I'm like 2%, like I can identify with that, but not really. I think I'm really identified as a woman. And then the next one is other genders, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the reason for this scaling is partially to help people see like how gender and gender identity shows up in themselves and in other people. So no one pretty much, I mean, some people are 100%, but most people have a little bit of the other. So anyway, okay, so gender expression is how you show up in the world. So that can be through your clothing, your mannerisms, your tone of voice, the language you use. And so gender expression is basically how people make decisions about your gender by looking at you, right? So in terms of gender expression, are you more, where are you in the scale of feminine? Sorry. Oh, look at that. Nice for me to cover because I'm going to breathe on y'all. So where are you in terms of your gender expression? Like how feminine, how masculine, how other? So for me, I would probably say I'm like 70% showing up as feminine, and then another 30% maybe more masculine. So, it just kind of depends on the day. And so your gender expression is how you show up in the world, and what people like, and that's where people make decisions about like who you are with regard to your gender. And then we got the little sex assigned at birth thing. Okay, so that's that. I'm gonna stop the share and go back to my highly sophisticated PowerPoint presentation. All right, so here we go. Terms, cisgender. Cisgender, the way I think about this is matchy-matchy. Your gender assigned at birth matches the private parts you have. So I'm cisgender, as I mentioned earlier. Someone is transgender. A transgender person, their sex assigned at birth, I'll just use myself as an example. My sex assigned at birth was female. And if I were transgender, I would have my female parts, but in my heart, I would feel like a guy or a boy or a man. I would feel like a man. My identity would be like, I identify with being a man. It feels right to me to be a man, but I have the female parts. So if I were transgender, the way I think about it is that I would be transferring from being a woman to a man. So that's the trans part. You're transferring from one gender to the other. A pretty small part of the population is transgender. And I'll talk about this, and I'll talk about some kid stuff in just a minute. So that's transgender. And these are the main terms. There's a bazillion others, and I will send you the link to that too, so you can just bone up. Okay, next, agender. An agender person just doesn't have a gender. They don't identify with either gender. They are gender free, and they oftentimes will use they, them pronouns because they don't feel like they have a gender. Gender fluid. A gender fluid person feels like back and forth between genders. So they might be showing up as more masculine or feeling more feminine. They might feel more like a guy, more like a gal, more like another gender. So I just think about that like this, as you can see, fluid. It's not fixed. Like most cisgender people are fixed in their gender. A gender fluid person is back and forth. And sometimes the fluidity can happen day to day. Sometimes someone can identify as a woman for a long time and then flow back into feeling more like a guy. So the fluidity is really just not fixed. All right, ready? Talk about pronouns. So pronouns are really personal. They're really important. And one of the reasons that, like, you'll see that we all are having our pronouns, right? Of people that I can see. So she, her are my pronouns. The reason pronouns are important is because it helps us understand a person's gender. And the reason that I use pronouns is it's actually a signal that I am supportive of all different genders, and I acknowledge that there are different genders. And so often there are some other gender words like Z and Zay. I don't hear those very frequently. What we're hearing more in gender neutrality is they and them. And the world is leaning more towards using they and them consistently. And so I'm working on that, but sometimes it's confusing, right? Sometimes we do need to use a gendered word. So they, them is most inclusive. Some folks have trouble because it ain't right grammatically, and we just need to move along from that. We say they all the time in casual language. So I don't know what the uproar is about. So one thing about pronouns is that, and gender diversity, is that sometimes you might meet someone and you just can't tell their gender. And so in some ways it's not your business, but in other ways it's important to know somebody's gender because it is part of who they are or how they identify. So one thing you can do is when you introduce yourself, just say, hi, I'm Amy, I use she, her pronouns. If that person is comfortable or gets that, they'll tell you their pronouns when they introduce themselves. Most of the time it's not important. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Like, depending on how long you're interacting with someone, you can say, you know, I use she, her pronouns. I want to use your correct pronouns. And then they'll tell you, or they won't, because humans. So let me think if there's anything else. Oh, I know. So right now I'm getting emails from parents. I just got a Facebook message from a mom, and she said that her 13-year-old daughter has changed her name, and she's using, I think she said, I don't know if she's changed her name and her pronouns. And the mom said, she's never showed any sign of gender dysphoria. I don't know what's happening here, but her peer group, her close group of friends, they are 6 of them have changed their names and changed their genders. And so she was asking me, she's like, what do we do with this? What is happening? She said, I think a couple of the kids in that group might be trans or a different gender, but she said, I can't believe that all of them are like really a different gender. I'm just quoting her. And so one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is this is happening pretty frequently, primarily in upper middle class communities of white girls. They are in liberal cities. So the cool thing is, and this is the way I think about it, is that they have this like kind of a blessing of being able to explore themselves in a broader way. They have more information. They are looking at, just like everybody does in adolescence, right? I was like a total punker, new waver, right? This is an extension of that. I would have definitely changed my names and definitely changed my pronouns. Just heads up. Not necessarily because I felt that way, but just because I was seeing what it was like. And I don't want to say the word experimentation, but it's just trying on. And so my lovely colleague, Joe Langford, says to hold this lightly. And so what that means is meet them where they are, use their new name, use their new pronoun, and then wait and be supportive. Some kids absolutely are different gender, absolutely are trans, like 100%. So you can't tell by looking. And some kids come to this later in life. And then of course we all know those 4-year-olds are like, wrong body, I'm a boy. So hold it lightly, ask questions, and wait. Because kids who are not straight and not cis have extremely high suicide rates, like crazy high. And the one thing that keeps those suicide rates on par with those cis and straight kids is parental support. And we're talking 100% parental support. I'm pretty sure no one wants their kid to kill themselves. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right? So, and this can be challenging, but there's tons of help for parents, and they need us. And this whole thing around gender is confusing for lots of folks. And this is just a total crash course. And again, it's not perfect. It is not perfect, but I'm hoping just to give you a little, like a bump, right? Like a bump in terms of how to talk about this and think about it. So, boom, done. Questions? And feel free to unmute yourself if you're not feeling, shy. I'm hiding myself. I don't ever want to see myself. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't hide myself. So questions or comments or more, if you want to add more, I'm happy to, like, more the merrier, because like I said, not perfect. Go for it.
Hi, I have a question. So I'm not sure why it's not showing up. I'm on my phone, but usually my pronouns are there and say she, her. So I was on a call this morning and someone said a little bit flippantly, what's with all this pronoun stuff on these calls? And it was had a little bit of a flip, kind of a little bit confronting. I was taken off guard, and I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have a great elevator pitch on how to have that be an easier conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Were you talking to grown-ups?
I was, yeah, yes.
Okay. So let me think. I think what I would say is, like, thanks for asking. And I would say this is kind of confusing. I get that. And so the reason people are using pronouns is just to show support for other folks who aren't necessarily, in the right gender for their body. And then just say it's out of respect and support of the LGBTQ community. And then you've done your thing. And like many things, you just make soothing sounds. Because, what do we got? That. Does that help? Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts or contributions? Like, again, I'm open to other brains on this. Any others, like, scenarios? Oh, go ahead, Laura. What you got?
I work for the Community Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Program here in Iowa. So I'm the program manager here, and Iowa is a unique state, as I think many of our states are. So we have pockets of of liberalism and humanness, and we have pockets of not.
Mhm.
And the school districts are the same. So is some of the struggles that our educators have when they go into school is with a form that says, you know, your identity, your gender, male, female, other, or even just not even allowing other or transgender, and the, well, this is how it was in my day kind of crap. And how do we begin to educate and share? So it's been a beautiful transition, I think, for some folks to be able to use Zoom now with the she, her, hers, and it's acceptable and it's a talking point, and we've been able to embrace that and celebrate that and educate, and it can be that rubby sand part for others that I think is good for growth.
Mhm.
And so it's been good. I embrace it, but you know, it's also that frustration of just because we did it that way when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, doesn't mean it's right now. Because we know more, we should do more.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think also like just culturally too, right? This can be really challenging for people that aren't from like my white European American liberal secular progressive, you know, all that culture. And so finding ways to kindly and gently nudge, right? It's, you know, I have I'm mentoring a woman in Kenya, and we have had conversations. She's Christian in the conservative sense, but really into sexuality education. And so when we talked, she asked me about being gay, and so we had a conversation where I was like, I nudged her. I felt like I nudged her along because that's just not a part of her culture. It's very shameful and not talked about, and all of that. So I kind of feel um, like when we have these conversations, like they need to be sort of calm and connecting and small, right? Like just a small push. Like you said, the Zoom thing is terrific, right? It's terrific. And then, you know, we're looking at kids and gender. You know, one of the things that happens in early childhood is that kids will decide, like, I'm a boy. Like my neighbor, Megan, at about 5, 4, she announced, I'm a boy. I'm a boy. She was a boy for a year, and then she's not a boy anymore. And so in early childhood, we expect some kind of gender fluidity. They're testing the waters. They're trying to figure out, am I a boy? Am I a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to be a girl? And in Megan's case, it made a lot more sense for her personality to not be a girl, just considering her mom and her older sister. Like boy life looked way better, is my guess, just personality wise. So one of the things that's also happening is that there are kiddos who are 3, 4, and 5 that announce, like, I'm a boy, I'm a girl. And yeah, they might be trans. Sure, absolutely. But chances are slim that they're actually not. And so taking time with those kids, it usually takes about 8, like if a kid is 4, 5, 6, and they are like, I'm a boy, um, absolutely, we're going to look at, okay, this kid may very well be trans. But some folks are jumping on the train a little early for my taste, and I think we just need to give it a little more expansion and time. And again, you know, then we're looking at these adolescents who are also expanding their gender and fooling around in gender and sorting it out and experiencing it. It's kind of the same thing. Like, let's just wait and see. But an older kid that says, I'm absolutely, like, I know several kids who are trans, and they were like, at 10, they're like, wrong bod, right? And so sometimes it comes later. It's just a delicate balance. But again, like, we're going to go back into that. You just need to believe, trust, wait, right? Be supportive. Be supportive. Other things, we don't have to talk about gender, by the way.
I have a sort of question, I guess. How do you see, like, someone who's trans versus someone who's homosexual? Like, I see, you know, being gay as something, just a trait that you're born with.
Right.
And I kind of view transgender as that too, but I don't know how most people view it, or I have a disagreement with my partner on this, and it's just interesting to think about.
Yeah. So people are, like you said, they're just inherently attracted to who they're attracted to. And on that gender unicorn, it's like the scaling a thing again, like how much you attracted to women, how much you attracted to men, how much you attracted to other genders. And so, yeah, that's like your sexuality is absolutely inherent, and then can be influenced somewhat by what you find sexually stimulating. So sometimes you may think you're one way and then you see, I'm just going to use porn, like you see lesbian porn and you're like, oh, maybe I like gals some, right? So you get kind of, you're again, we're like this expansion of sexuality. When it comes to being transgender, from what I understand, they're just wrong body. It's how they're wired. You know, all the trans folks I know, I had a colleague in grad school who really, really struggled for years and then finally was like, oh, I'm trans. And there's no doubt, no doubt. And if you met him, you would never know that he was once, this is terrible. He's like this, he was this like not feminine gal when he was a gal, and his name was like Mary Jane or Mary Louise. It was like very like, wow, it doesn't work. So when it comes to the gender thing, it is inherent. And I think that we weren't able to say like, oh, I don't really feel totally like a woman. Right. We just didn't have the language and it wasn't okay. Right. Like we didn't know it was okay to talk about that. So we're kind of pigeonholing people. But again, I can't remember the numbers. The vast majority of people are cisgender. They're fine in the gender they were assigned at birth. It's not like when it comes to true transgender person, it's not something they're trying on. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm even being helpful.
Is it a disconnect between like their brain and their body? Like
and their heart? Yeah. I'm trying to think. Does anybody have an analogy? I'm trying to think if there's an analogy. Yeah, disconnect.
Analogy, but I just think of a woman that when I met her, she was female and all the way through high school, but always did not dress as female, right? Her identity was
her expression
sexual and her expression was very gender neutral. And then her freshman year of college age kind of thing, it was that, holy shit, something's not right here, and I've got to be me.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that the mental health crisis that she was feeling really had to do with her gender, and the freedom of when I just remember a mutual friend saying, he is now trying to bind himself so tightly that the breasts don't show that there's like wounds, because trying to be the person that they knew they were. And nobody goes through that kind of stuff just for fun.
Right. And I think it's just hard to understand. Like, I'm solidly in my gender, but just because I'm solidly a Democrat does not mean that I cannot, it's a terrible analogy, that I can't relate to a Republican, right? I'm sorry, that was a terrible analogy. But I think that's part of the difficulty with this, is because we feel good in and right in our genders. And then the idea that something so fundamental could be not right. Does that help? This is a great question. Thank you for asking it, because it's complicated, I think, and confusing. And then you throw sexuality in there and you get like, okay, like what did we do? Like Carrie's cousin Damon, who was like, from the time he was 3, everyone knew he was gay. And then we were the first people he came out to. And we're like, I don't know what he was expecting, but we're like, okay, thanks for telling us. And so sometimes you can tell by looking, but not always. And so just like thinking again about like, it's projection, I think, and sometimes it's projection. Like, I can't imagine being another way. So how do we stop projecting? Like, we all have kids, right? And so like, my Milo is, my husband Carrie's totally into motorcycles. Like you don't want to even know how many motorcycles we have. And he kept trying to get Milo to be interested in motorcycles. He just wanted him to be interested in motorcycles and working on bikes and working on cars. And he just was not. And so like looking at your kid and having these expectations for them, like, whatever, like we want our kids to be away, and then it turns out they're not away. And so we adjust, right? So Carrie got over Milo not being into motorcycles. And then true to adolescent form, guess who's totally into his car that he bought? That's a 1973 Mercedes diesel that he works on all the time, right? So, I think that we just need to kind of think about this like that. Like, we don't always, you just got to go with the flow, right? Like, people who are who they are, they like what they like in all kinds of ways. They feel how they feel. And
it's hard when we all grew up putting people in boxes.
Mhm.
because that's how at least I was raised. The first question was, basically if you're a boy or a girl, somehow along that line, where do you live and what do you do?
Mhm.
I don't have significant answers. Or where are you from?
Yeah.
Right. If you may look different than me or have a different skin tone than me, I'm going to ask you, well, where are you really from? I mean, that's what an Iowan does.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
Right.
You need
Right.
to know that. Just take me as who I am, like as you see me. But
Yeah.
it's a level of trust that can be hard for folks.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and again, this is not perfect. And there's like it's a big conversation. I just was hoping to kind of get it started and give y'all some tools and just like I think the cool thing about it is it makes our world so much more interesting and people so much more interesting and just these different facets. And then for folks who have been really suffering, to not suffer anymore, right? To have these safe places where they can find people. Like, if I'm on a Zoom thing and I see someone with their pronouns, I'm like, all right, like, okay, like I know what's happening there. We have a connection in this way. And so anyway, that's what I got to say. I hope it was helpful. Rachel, anything else? I mean, I'm hoping I'm not leaving you like,
No, I'm just trying to wrap around my head around how I believe that both things you're inherently born with, and it's hard talking with someone else who doesn't feel that way. And
yeah.
so.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like baby steps, right? Like little baby steps towards helping that person. And sometimes it takes somebody else to say it, unfortunately. You know how that is. If you've been in a long-term relationship and your spouse says something, you're like, nah, and then somebody else says it and you're like, dear God, that's brilliant, right? Because whatever. Yeah, it's hard. And I think the thing with just having kids is like at the end of the day, we want what's best for them, right? We want them to be healthy and happy and whole. And that means we have to make adjustments, right? And we have to deal with shit that we don't want to. And that, my whole deal is like, if you're uncomfortable and freaking out, you do that on your own time and you fake it till you make it with your kids, right? Like you pretend like you're comfortable and confident, and then you go do your crazy elsewhere because they need to see us as whole and healthy and happy and because they need us to be that way. And they're not going to know we're faking. I mean, some kids do know, but mostly they're so self-centered they don't quite notice that we're like putting it on. Takes a little practice. Okay, shall we call it a day? Oh, somebody just popped back. Rachel coming back. Oh no, you're Rachel. Who's that? Lane. Oh, we're just finishing up. So anyway, this is recorded, so you can share it with whoever you want to share it with. It'll be on the site as well, on the Solution Center site. And then here's what's next. We're gonna talk about birth control on March 24th at 12:30 PT. And so if you're thinking my kids are too young or I know all the things, it is really good to get a refresher. I'm just gonna let you know that old rumor that birth pills are gonna ruin you and they're terrible for you, Laura, is still out there. It is so not true. It is so not true. So we'll look at different kinds of birth control and talk about like when the best time for your person with a vulva and a vagina and ovaries should be on it, and that kind of stuff. So, and also the last chunk isn't that we don't have to talk about the thing. We can talk about whatever's on your mind. I just wanted to give you a little education because that's what I like to do. Okay, I'm gonna go eat lunch. Enjoy your snow.
It's melting. It's melting.
I know. I don't think Rachel's is melting.
It is actually. It's like almost 50 today, but it's gonna be like 20 on Friday. So
that's sorry. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.